Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
Politics, Southern politics especially, is almost never dull, and that rings particularly true this year. Welcome again to the most widely watched source for Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and thank you for watching. On this program, Andy Brack from South Carolina Statehouse Report, Jonathan Kappler from North Carolina NC Free or North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, and later on, special guest, Tar Heel State Speaker of the House, Pro Tem, Winston-Salem Representative Dale Folwell.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded January 6, 2012. On this week's program, Andy Brack of Statehouse Report, Jonathan Kappler of the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, and special guest, Representative Dale Folwell, Speaker Pro Tempore of the North Carolina House of Representatives. Now, Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program, Jonathan, thanks for being here. And Andy Brack, can we get a shot of Andy? I want to get a shot of Andy down in Monk's Corner. Andy, why was it during your name on the open of the program that you're doing, this kind of thing? What was that all about?
Because I thought it was Sports Center.
So you do watch Fox?
Yeah, all the time.
Well, welcome, Andy. Good to have you from Monk's Corner. Appreciate you taking the time. Jonathan, let me start with you. Here we are right around, and I think it's important to know that as of taping here, we are prior to the South Carolina primary, but as of broadcast, we will be just past the South Carolina primary. But nonetheless, right around primary season in South Carolina, which many consider the first real primary in the election season of 2012. You have to, well, you don't have to, but you certainly can run that against what is going on in North Carolina this year, and that is the ramp up to the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte. Kind of compare and contrast what that means for the Carolinas.
Sure, yeah. The Carolinas are playing a really important and really kind of different in their own way role in the presidential election this year. South Carolina being the third early primary state, really consequential election there. And then North Carolina obviously being one of the crucial swing states for both President Obama and the eventual Republican nominee. In Charlotte, kind of being on in the nexus of those two, is kind of getting both bits of it. But in the early primary states, with South Carolina being here and being so close to Charlotte and other areas of North Carolina, what you're also seeing is a lot of those Republican presidential candidates coming to North Carolina and trying to gain some money, so raise some cash. And the president's been here doing that as well, the vice president and others. So it's an interesting thing where in the Carolinas, we're really here start to finish of the entire 2012 election cycle.
Andy, what's your take on that? Same question.
Well, the one thing that's really interesting about South Carolina being so early is that the candidates have a chance to meet people all across the state. New Hampshire, Iowa, and South Carolina are all relatively small states that are easy to get around. Candidates can learn a lot about the state, about the state's voters. It allows the candidates that aren't doing so well in the polls to really compete, and it allows them to weed out some of the candidates as well.
Do either of you get a sense, and let's bring it, you talked to Jonathan specifically about Charlotte and how it's going to be the epicenter going forward. Certainly it is an election year in North Carolina for the chief executive of the state as well, so it's all kind of coming together. Does Charlotte specifically you know, the DNC and politics at that level is a much more bare knuckle sport. It's a blood sport. And, you know, in the Carolinas, we like to be genteel and kind to one another, certainly competitive. And do you get a sense that Charlotte really understands what this is going to be all about?
It's going to be real tough, and it's going to be a long, sustained campaign, and that's not necessarily something we saw in 2008 where we had a competitive Democratic primary that was late in the process, and that was under intense focus from President Obama and Senator Hillary Clinton at that point. But then it wasn't really contested for a long time. It was a surprise swing competitive state later on in the presidential election. And this year, everybody knows the bullseye is on North Carolina. We're going to be competitive. And so you're going to have not only the national campaigns, but also independent expenditure groups and other folks trying to influence the elections from the presidential election on down. And we've got very crucial, important, consequential, and competitive elections happening at the state legislative level as well.
Andy, let's shift just a second. Let's just talk about corporate dollars and the money supporting these presidential campaigns. The dollars have gotten big, and I'm going to pick on the president specifically because he set a very progressive goal about raising $1 billion in a very austere point in our time here. How does that square when politics has gotten so expensive and quite frankly so partisan, and we will get a chance to bring this up with our special guest later, but how do you see it?
You know, it costs money to run campaigns. People know what they're doing when they give. There's a lot of pressure to give to people. But, you know, there is a constant focus on raising money all the time. My old boss, Senator Hollings, here from South Carolina, said that when he ran in the Senate, you're essentially raising $20,000 or $30,000 every week for 6 years. Money has always been part of the process. What I think a lot of people worry about is if you look to Iowa and now to New Hampshire, and I'm sure by the time this airs in South Carolina, these big super PACs are flooding money into campaigns, and they're having an impact, and there's always been negative advertising, but I have a feeling that this year we're going to see more nasty, negative, mean, swift boat stuff than we've ever seen in the past.
At what point, Andy, do you think folks, and we're going to bring our guest on in just a second, but at what point do you think the tipping point is and folks just don't want to hear that anymore?
You know, I don't know. I have a feeling that it's going to be, this year is a little bit of a new year for North Carolina, definitely. In South Carolina, we have kind of a constant campaign for 4 years because our gubernatorial and statewide races are on the off years. It'll be next in 2014. So every 2 years, we have a big statewide election. So we're constantly in the midst of politicking here. People just turn it off at a point. You see in South Carolina, for example, has one of the lower voter turnout rates in the country. North Carolina is about 10% higher. But what will happen is that people get so tired of it and so frustrated with government, and politicians are rated lower than just about anybody, even newspaper people, that people are just going to turn it off and not vote. And that is the harmful part to the process, because we need to have more people voting, not fewer.
And a quick 30 seconds on the same thing, Jonathan.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I'm not sure that a lot of campaigns have taken into consideration in North Carolina. We're going to maybe reach a saturation point earlier in the process than people are realizing. And it's going to be really hard for individual campaigns to break through and get to their voters.
So does that mean not only can't they get to the voters, but they can't raise the dollars? Is that where it'll show up?
Well, there's going to be money flying. And I think they'll be able to access the traditional fundraisers, but it's going to be those swing voters that they need to target to actually win a general election campaign.
That's probably a good place. We're going to at least bring it up with Representative Folwell in just a second. Next week on our program, talk about politicians. He is the mayor of Florence. Mayor Stephen Wakala will be here. And in 2 weeks, the new chamber chair in Charlotte, they have a new chair. His name is Frank Emery. Frank will join us talking about not just the DNC, but also the challenges that Charlotte faces in the wake of the upset at the banks, and where they might be with the DNC and what Charlotte might look like after that. One of the things that keeps employers of all sizes up at night is the escalating cost of a thing called workers' compensation. Many call it a hidden cost in doing business. In the summer of last year, it's hard to believe, the summer of 2011, the North Carolina General Assembly ratified and the governor signed into law the first comprehensive reform of workers' comp in 17 years. Joining us now as a key supporter and architect of that initiative of the North Carolina House Speaker Pro Tem, Dale Folwell. Your Honor, welcome to the program. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about workers' comp. Why were you so singularly focused? And by the way, Representative, anyone that knows you says that Dale Folwell will pick 2 or 3 or 5 issues, dive deep into those issues, and make those things that he wants to change or at least affect. Why was workers' comp at the top of your list?
Well, workers' comp came to me as a result of listening and then acting and then fixing something that a small business person in Mount Airy, North Carolina told me about, where they were talking about the escalating costs of running their small businesses. And then if you want to fast forward to Fayetteville, North Carolina, I realized through research that the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company in Fayetteville has to produce 3,000 tires per day to pay the workers' comp premium of that plant for that one day. And then I started peeling away the onion and looking at the fact that the largest employer in North Carolina is the state of North Carolina. This is a $100 million issue from our budget standpoint as an employer of people at community colleges, school systems, prisons, and Department of Transportation. And if all that's not enough for your viewers, I think this visual will tell everything. This was a system that was broke and broken. These are the workers' comp laws of Virginia. These are the workers' comp laws of Tennessee. These are the workers' comp laws of South Carolina. These are the workers' comp laws of North Carolina. This was a system where people who were injured were not getting the care they needed quickly enough. We had a lifetime benefit for people with a temporary disability. And you talk about economic development a lot on this show, that if a person, if you're developing or trying to recruit businesses to one of the other states, the first graph that you would show them is this graph, which shows that every border state that borders North Carolina has a cap on their temporary benefits, but North Carolina did not.
Don't other policy decisions have the same benefit or same impact?
Well, lots of policy decisions have the same impact, but this is, as sophisticated as your viewers are, I don't think any one of them woke up this morning thinking about workers' compensation. But it's one of the invisible costs that are keeping North Carolina businesses from coming to North Carolina, businesses from expanding in North Carolina, and in some cases, businesses that are going to leave the state. It's interesting, just recently in Operation Soccer, which was an incentives deal that you've talked about in the past, the workers' comp reform in North Carolina was one of the 3 leading positive reasons why that company was thinking about relocating here. So it's one of the invisible things that we have to continue to work on to benefit the citizens of this state.
Andy, I'm going to give you a chance to wade in here with the representative.
Well, Mr. Speaker, nice to see you. I'm from South Carolina, not North Carolina, but I've done a little bit of reading about North Carolina, and I see that Forbes magazine rates North Carolina as having the 3rd best business climate in the country. And I also know that North Carolina is considering some changes to unemployment structures and reforms as well. So, you know, what I am hearing, and I don't understand, is how can you have the 3rd best business climate and then have all these problems that have to be reformed?
Well, the first answer to his question is that number 3 is not number 1, and that's what we should be trying to get to. Secondly, it's one of the invisible things that I'm not sure even these ranking agencies ever look at. We need to make sure when we think about the state of North Carolina that we realize that for 56 miles, we have as much border with other states as California does. But you can't name one major city in California that borders another state. Think about North Carolina, Asheville, Charlotte, Wilmington, Winston-Salem's 40 miles from the border, Boone. We have a lot of populations that sit on our borders. So therefore, whether it's our workers' compensation system, our unemployment insurance system, we need to make sure that we're not doing things that make North Carolina uncompetitive with the states that border us. This is not just an issue, obviously, to the small businesses or the sponsor of this program, but it's also an issue for the state of North Carolina as an employer of people, and it's even a bigger issue for the counties, the school districts, and the cities who are going to see positive impact from this reform going forward.
Jonathan?
Well, one of the things that
Hold on. Did you have a follow-up, Andy? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess what I wanted to know is that how is this there's an old saying, you know, make sure you look at the donut, not the hole. And what I'm curious about is that North Carolina's unemployment rate is one of the tops in the country at 9.5% at the last thing. South Carolina's is 9.9%. And what is fiddling around with workers' comp going to really do to help somebody get a job? Isn't this watching the hole instead of the donut?
Well, I absolutely disagree. I was in McDowell County recently where they have an employer there that employs 2,500 people. 3 years ago, the CEO of that company in Chicago said, you've got to fix the workers' comp system in North Carolina, because if you don't, I'm going to move that plant to another place that starts with the letter M, and it's not going to be Marion. So this is one of the invisible things that I think that HR directors, chief financial officers, and CEOs think about. It's one of the invisible costs. And the fact is that everybody in this studio has a different level of understanding of how much government we should have, but everybody agrees that whatever government we have, we want it to work. Mm-hmm. And this is a system that was in bad need of reform.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that was really interesting to me in watching this process unfold in the General Assembly this past year was that the partisanship and the kind of ideological battles that were going on in the General Assembly dominated almost every single legislative battle. But this was one issue where the vote totals were 110 to 4 in some cases. And I'm curious as to how you were able to, in a really challenging political environment, to cobble together a wide variety, as I understand it, from ideological perspectives, to get them on board for something of this major reform.
That's a great question. The way that I approached that was to embrace who I was. And what I am is a conservative who tries to fix the problems that impact people. And then we went and met with the governor's staff, and then we reached out to the Advocates for Justice, the AFL-CIO, the plaintiffs' lawyers, and we said, let's don't focus on what we can do because we're in charge. Let's focus on what should be done. Because there was a broad amount of agreement about a lot of things in here that is hurting lawyers, that's hurting employers, that's hurting employees, and hurting the injured. The title of this bill was Protect. The first goal of any workers' compensation system is for people not to get injured. It's protect. The second word was put. We want to make sure that if people are injured, that they get the medical attention they need as quickly as possible and find some kind of suitable employment to get them back to work as soon as possible. Protect and put North Carolinians back to work. For those that are tragically injured, we want to get them everything they deserve and then some. It's ironic that if you were killed on the job, your spouse only got 300 weeks of benefit in North Carolina. But if you had a temporary disability, that benefit was for the rest of your life. It was all completely broken.
You know, we're kind of talked around this issue of partisanism, and I've got to bring this up, Representative. I think this is critical. Recently, Democrats were not happy with the fact that Republicans in North Carolina had late-night sessions, and Democrats felt like things were being done in the dark and out of sight. The Republicans felt like they were left out of the process when it came to a judicial appointee commission. In South Carolina, Andy, you know this well, that Nikki Haley wanted everybody that answers a government phone to say it's a great day in South Carolina, and the Statehouse in Columbia wanted to take that and make a law to say you didn't have to do that. So, here we are with issues that don't get the job done, that show at least fractured leadership. I guess as Speaker Pro Tem especially, there seems to be a responsibility with that job to be the relationship manager.
Sure. In
your case, in the House, and to say, why can't we all get along and why shouldn't we get along? So how do we get the effectiveness of having two opposite poles with not having the argumentative part of that? Is that ever going to happen?
Well, probably not. Obviously,
it seems to be getting worse.
Sure. The Speaker is the traffic cop in the House and the President Pro Tem in the Senate. I think what happens is that we end up the gap between the citizens and the government in North Carolina and South Carolina has never been wider. And what I try to do is I try to knock down barriers that make that gap wider and bring people closer to their government. And the way that I do that is I only focus on 4 or 5 things a year, as you mentioned, in an effort to fix things that seem so marginal on the front end, but have such a huge impact on the back end. I have a memo in my file here from Goodyear, ironically, that says that there was a person injured after this bill became effective. And because of the legislation, instead of reserving $400,000, because they're self-insured, just like the state is, they only had to reserve $250,000. That extra money is now remaining in Fayetteville. The person got the attention they needed quicker, and it looks like that person, instead of being on a lifetime benefit, is going to be able to return back to that plant to work between 18 and 24 months from now. But the second paragraph is the one that really takes your breath. It says that Goodyear had recently decided to close its Union City, Tennessee plant, the same size as the one in Fayetteville, same footprint, and they made the same product. One of the leading factors in closing a plant in Tennessee and not in North Carolina was the workers' comp reform that went on in North Carolina. And the memo ended up by saying, it's nice to know that our 3,000 employees in Fayetteville also know that the world is not tilted against North Carolina, that we can compete globally with all the sister plants around the United States.
Andy?
You know, it's nice to keep talking about these things that have happened, but I'm a guy that looks forward and looks to the future, and what I see in North Carolina that's happened over the last legislative session is that the General Assembly cut funding for early childhood education and cut funding for the university systems. We've been doing that in South Carolina, and we're at the bottom of the list. North Carolina, I was up a few days ago in Hendersonville, and what is remarkably different about the public education system in North Carolina is that there is public support behind it. In South Carolina, in the legislature, there's sometimes, I feel, a feeling that the public education doesn't get what it wants or what it deserves. What I am worried about is North Carolina going down the same road towards South Carolina by cutting these investments in the future. Invest is not a dirty word, meaning just spend money only. It's investing in human capital. So what can you say to people that are worried that the university system is going to get more cuts? I mean, certainly it can use perhaps some cuts, and early childhood education is going to suffer more.
I guess my response would be that the days of spraying and praying, spraying money on the problems of public education and pray that they work, I think those days are over. But this is not like a piece of country ham where you can just take a sharp knife and cut the fat around it and all of a sudden all these problems go away. The issues that he refers to that are in K-12 education and in higher education, it's marbleized meat. This fat is deep into the meat of all these different agencies. And what we have to do is we have to continue to focus not on the systems, but on the students. If we can put our emphasis on the students and not the systems, we can correct these problems. But the other issue is that the 70% of the people in Winston-Salem have no direct involvement with public schools except that they're asked to pay for them. And they want to see a better return on that investment. Our four-year high school graduation rate is horrible. Our four-year college graduation rate in North Carolina is even worse. People are tired of spraying and praying. They want things fixed. They want representatives to represent them. They want people to go down there and be a verb to fix the problems that are facing the state. And I agree I agree. Any investments in public education are the result of, that's why I'm sitting here.
Yeah, Andy, I'm sorry,
Well,
but we got about a minute.
I guess what I worry about is that you say it's marbleized. I say perhaps you're going to be eating your seed corn, which is not a good thing.
You know what, Andy, I wish we could go down this road, but we got about a minute left, and we're going to have to wrap it up.
Sure.
But thank you. And Jonathan, I want one more question for the speaker here. Beginning of December of 2011 now, not long ago, you surprised a lot of people and said you weren't going to seek a sixth term, and that's all you said.
Right.
Fourth term.
Right.
Why not? Do you have your eye on a higher seat?
Well, the reason is that it really goes back to Matthew 14, that at some point everybody has to get out of the boat. And I've done a lot of thinking about what the opportunities are in 2012. A great opportunity for me is to go home, which I think every politician should think about, going home either to the district or the house.
You're going to buy a bigger boat?
No, I don't own a boat at all. But
we're out of time.
Okay.
Your Honor, thank you for being on the program.
Yeah.
Nice to see you. Jonathan, thank you. Andy, thanks for the stretch from Monk's Corner, but it's good to have you on the program.
Problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Take
Nice
care.
to see y'all. Thank you.
Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte, enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, who's responsible for rising healthcare costs. Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health is a not-for-profit group of hospitals and medical clinics caring for surrounding communities. Their nurses, physicians, and staff are nationally recognized for their remarkable devotion to patient care. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.